Sarah Martinez clutched her worn suitcase tighter as she stepped off the Greyhound bus in Flagstaff, Arizona. The desert wind whipped her dark hair across her face, carrying the scent of sage and dust. She had exactly $43 in her pocket and nowhere to go. Behind her lay a trail of broken promises and a husband whose fists spoke louder than his words ever did. The bus station buzzed with travelers heading to different destinations, but Sarah felt completely alone. She had bought a ticket to the first place that sounded far enough from California, where Roberto would never think to look for her. Arizona seemed like another planet, compared to the crowded streets of Los Angeles where she had spent the last 5 miserable years of her marriage. Her phone buzzed with another threatening message from Roberto. "Come home now or you'll regret it forever." Sarah deleted it without reading the rest. She had heard those words too many times, seen the rage in his eyes when dinner wasn't ready on time, when she spoke to the neighbors, when she even breathed wrong according to his twisted logic. The bruises on her ribs still ached from their last fight 3 days ago. That night, when Roberto had passed out drunk on the couch, Sarah had packed a single suitcase with her most important belongings. She left behind the small apartment they shared, her part-time job at the grocery store, and the few friends who had grown tired of making excuses for her black eyes and split lips. Walking through the unfamiliar streets of Flagstaff, Sarah realized she had no plan beyond getting away. The mountain air felt thin in her lungs and the altitude made her dizzy. She passed by shops and restaurants, their warm light seeming to mock her situation. Everyone else belonged somewhere, had someone waiting for them at home. As evening approached, Sarah found herself in a small park near the town center. Families were packing up their picnic blankets. Couples walked hand in hand and children played on swings while their parents watched with loving eyes. The scene made her heart ache with loneliness. She sat on a bench and tried to figure out what to do next. A motel across the street advertised rooms for $60 a night. Sarah counted her money again, knowing that even one night would eat up most of her remaining cash. But where else could she go? She had no family left, no friends who would understand why she had finally found the courage to leave. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The vending machine near the bus station had taken her last $5 for a stale sandwich and warm soda. Now even that small comfort felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. As darkness settled over the mountain town, Sarah noticed she wasn't alone in the park anymore. A few other people had gathered on benches and under trees, carrying backpacks and shopping bags filled with their possessions. These were people like her, she realized, people with nowhere else to go when night fell. An older man with weathered skin and kind eyes approached her bench. "First night out here?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. "It gets cold up here in the mountains," he warned. "You'll want to find somewhere warm before midnight or wrap up real good." Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders. In her hurry to escape, she hadn't thought about the different climate. California had been warm and sunny when she left. Here in Arizona, the desert air turned sharp and bitter after sunset. The man, who introduced himself as Frank, had been living on the streets for 2 years after losing his job and apartment. He shared stories of the local shelters, most of which had long waiting lists or strict rules that kept people like Sarah away. The women's shelter had been full for weeks, he explained, and the general shelter didn't feel safe for someone in her situation. As the hours passed, more people shared their stories with Sarah. Maria, a young mother whose husband had kicked her out when she lost her job. James, a veteran who couldn't afford rent on his disability check. Each person had a different path that led them to sleeping under the stars, but they all shared the same look of quiet desperation. Around 10 o'clock, Sarah noticed a police car slowly driving through the park. Frank and the others quickly gathered their belongings and melted away into the shadows between buildings. "They don't like us staying here," Maria whispered to Sarah. "But where else can we go?" Sarah followed the group to a darker area behind a closed restaurant, where they settled in for the night among cardboard boxes and old blankets. The concrete felt hard and cold against her back, even through her jacket. She listened to the sounds of the unfamiliar city settling into sleep, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake leaving everything behind. Her phone buzzed again with more messages from Roberto. This time he was pleading instead of threatening. "Please come home, baby. I'm sorry. I'll change. I promise things will be different." Sarah had heard those words countless times before, always followed by the same cycle of violence and apologies. She turned off her phone to save the battery and closed her eyes, trying to block out the fear of what tomorrow would bring. Around her, she could hear the quiet conversations of people who had learned to find comfort in each other when the world had turned its back on them. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine trees from the mountains surrounding the town. Despite her fear and uncertainty, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in her adult life, she had made a choice for herself. She had walked away from a life that was slowly killing her spirit, even if she didn't know what came next. As she drifted off to an uneasy sleep on the cold ground, Sarah dreamed of warm beds and safe places, of people who would understand her situation without judgment. She dreamed of starting over somewhere new, building a life where fear didn't live in every corner of her daily existence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties about food and shelter and safety. But tonight, for the first time in years, Roberto couldn't reach her with his fists or his rage. That small victory felt like the beginning of something bigger, something that might eventually lead her back to the person she used to be before fear became her constant companion. The morning sun felt harsh against Sarah's face as she woke up behind the restaurant, her body stiff from sleeping on concrete. Around her, the small group of homeless people was already stirring, rolling up blankets and preparing for another day of survival. Her phone showed dozens of missed calls from Roberto, but she kept it turned off. Frank offered Sarah half of a day-old donut he had found outside a bakery. "Food pantry opens at 10, he told her, pointing down the street. "But the line gets long fast." Sarah thanked him and tried to eat the stale pastry, though her stomach felt too nervous to accept much food. The food pantry was housed in the basement of an old church, and Frank was right about the line. At least 30 people waited outside when Sarah arrived, some with children clinging to their legs, others carrying everything they owned in shopping carts and garbage bags. The volunteers who ran the pantry were kind but overwhelmed, handing out bags of donated groceries with practiced efficiency. When Sarah reached the front of the line, a volunteer named Mrs. Henderson asked for her identification and address. Sarah's cheeks burned with shame as she admitted she was homeless. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with understanding rather than judgment. "Happens to more people than you'd think." "Honey," she said quietly, filling a bag with canned goods, bread, and peanut butter. After leaving the food pantry, Sarah walked through downtown Flagstaff looking for work. Her limited experience working at the grocery store in Los Angeles didn't seem impressive to potential employers, especially when she couldn't provide a local address or references. Store managers looked at her with suspicion when she asked about applications, and several told her they weren't hiring without even glancing at her qualifications. By afternoon, Sarah's optimism from the morning had faded into despair. She sat in the same park where she had spent her first night, watching families enjoy the sunny weather, while she worried about where she would sleep when darkness came again. The $43 in her pocket felt like nothing against the reality of daily survival in a new city. That's when she first noticed the group of teenagers walking through the park. They wore typical clothes and carried school backpacks, but something about the way other people looked at them made Sarah pay attention. She heard whispered comments from passers-by, saw parents pulling their children closer when the teens walked past. One girl in particular caught Sarah's attention. She looked to be about 16, with long black hair braided down her back and warm brown skin that spoke of Native American heritage. While her friends laughed and joked together, this girl seemed to notice everything around her, including Sarah sitting alone on the bench with her suitcase. Their eyes met briefly across the park, and Sarah felt a moment of connection she couldn't explain. The girl's expression held understanding, as if she recognized something familiar in Sarah's situation. But the moment passed quickly as the teenagers continued walking toward town. Later that evening, Sarah found herself back in the same area behind the restaurant with Frank, Maria, and the others. The temperature had dropped again, and she shivered in her thin jacket as they shared stories and whatever food they had managed to find during the day. Maria talked about her 8-year-old daughter, who was staying with Maria's sister while Maria tried to get back on her feet. "I call her every day," Maria said, tears in her eyes, "but I can't explain why Mommy can't come home yet." How do you tell a little girl that grown-ups sometimes lose everything through no fault of their own? James, the veteran, shared his experiences trying to navigate the complex system of social services and assistance programs. They want paperwork for everything, he explained. Proof of address when you don't have an address, identification when your wallet got stolen, references when you've been out of work for months. It's like they designed the system to keep you out instead of helping you in. As the night grew colder, Sarah pulled her knees to her chest and tried to conserve body heat. Her ribs still ached from Roberto's last attack, and the hard ground made the pain worse. She wondered if other people walking past their makeshift camp realized that each person huddled there had once had a normal life, had once felt secure and hopeful about the future. Around midnight, Sarah was startled by the sound of footsteps approaching their hiding spot. Everyone tensed, expecting police officers or security guards telling them to move along. Instead, a young voice called out softly in the darkness, "Is there someone here named Sarah?" Sarah's heart pounded as she recognized the voice of the Native American girl from the park. "I'm Sarah," she answered quietly, standing up slowly so as not to frighten the teenager. The girl stepped into the dim light cast by a nearby street lamp. Up close, Sarah could see she was even younger than she had first appeared, probably not more than 15. But her eyes held a maturity that came from witnessing hardship. "My name is Ayanna," the girl said simply. "I saw you in the park today, and I've been thinking about you all evening. My grandmother always taught me to pay attention when the spirits put someone in your path for a reason." Sarah didn't know how to respond to such directness from someone so young. The other homeless people watched curiously as Ayanna continued speaking. "I know this might sound strange, but I think you need help, and my family might be able to provide it. My father owns some land outside town, and we have space for someone who needs a safe place to stay while getting back on their feet." The offer was so unexpected that Sarah wondered if she was dreaming. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "You don't even know me. Why would you want to help a stranger?" Ayanna's expression grew serious. "Because sometimes strangers aren't really strangers. Sometimes they're just family we haven't met yet. And because I know what it's like when people judge you before they know your story." She paused, glancing around at the other people listening to their conversation. "My family is Navajo. We understand what it means to be unwelcome in places, to have people cross the street to avoid you, to be seen as less than human. When I saw you today, I saw someone who was being treated the same way." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. After days of rejection and suspicion from potential employers and social service workers, this young girl was offering kindness without asking for anything in return. "I can't pay rent," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have a job or references or anything to offer in return." Ayanna smiled for the first time since approaching their group. "My father doesn't believe in turning away people who need help. He says the earth provides enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. We have enough to share." As Sarah stood there in the cold night air, surrounded by people who had also lost everything, she felt something shift inside her chest. For the first time since leaving Roberto, she felt the possibility of hope taking root in her heart. Sarah followed Ayanna through the quiet streets of Flagstaff, still hardly believing this was really happening. The teenager moved with confident steps despite the late hour, occasionally pointing out landmarks and explaining the town's layout. They walked past the closed shops and restaurants where Sarah had spent the day unsuccessfully looking for work. "My father will be awake," Ayanna explained as they reached the edge of town where streetlights became fewer and the darkness of the desert began. "He works nights sometimes, making jewelry and crafts to sell at the trading post. He says the quiet hours help him think better." They climbed into an old pickup truck parked near a gas station. Sarah hesitated for a moment, remembering all the warnings about trusting strangers. But something about Ayanna's calm presence made her feel safe. The girl seemed to understand her hesitation. "I know this is scary," Ayanna said as she started the engine. "Trust isn't something that comes easy when you've been hurt. But my grandmother always said that healing begins when someone shows you that not all people will cause you pain." The drive took them away from the town lights and into the vast darkness of the high desert. Sarah watched the landscape change through the passenger window, seeing shapes of mesas and rock formations outlined against the star-filled sky. She had never been in country so open and empty, where the horizon seemed to stretch forever in all directions. "How did you know I needed help?" Sarah asked as they bounced along a dirt road marked only by 2 wooden posts. Ayanna was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "My great-grandmother had what people call the sight. She could look at someone and know things about their journey, their pain, their purpose. Some of that ability runs in our family. though it's not always clear what it means. She glanced at Sarah in the dim dashboard light. When I saw you in the park today, I knew you were running from something dangerous. I could see it in the way you held yourself, like you were expecting to be hit. And I knew you were meant to be here for a reason, even if neither of us understands what that reason is yet. The truck pulled up to a modest house that seemed to blend naturally into the desert landscape around it. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, and Sarah could see the glow of light coming from windows that looked warm and welcoming. A few horses stood quietly in a corral nearby, and the air smelled of sage and wood smoke. Ayana's father emerged from the house before they had finished parking. He was a tall man with graying hair worn in a traditional braid and kind eyes that reminded Sarah immediately of his daughter. His presence felt solid and reassuring in a way that made Sarah's shoulders relax for the first time in days. "Dad, this is Sarah," Ayana said as they walked toward the house. "She's the one I told you about, the one I saw in the park who needed our help." Thomas Bigay studied Sarah's face in the porch light, not with judgment, but with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people's stories in their expressions. After a moment, he nodded as if confirming something he had already suspected. "You're welcome here," he said simply, opening the door wider. "Come inside and get warm. We can talk about everything else after you've had some food and rest." The house felt like stepping into another world. Native American artwork covered the walls, and the furniture looked handmade from local wood. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the kitchen smelled like fresh bread and coffee. Sarah realized she hadn't been in a real home, with a family who cared about each other, in longer than she could remember. Thomas's wife, Elena, appeared from the kitchen with a plate of food before Sarah had even finished introducing herself. She was a gentle woman with silver-streaked hair and hands that moved with practiced care as she set the meal on the table. "Eat first," Elena said kindly, when Sarah tried to explain her situation. "Stories are easier to tell when your stomach isn't empty and your body isn't tired from sleeping on cold ground." As Sarah ate the first real meal she had tasted in days, she found herself telling the Bigay family about Roberto, about the years of living in fear, about the desperate decision to flee with nothing but a suitcase and $43. She had expected to feel shame sharing these details with strangers, but instead she felt relief at finally speaking the truth aloud to people who listened without judgment. Thomas nodded thoughtfully when she finished her story. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he said. "It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. You showed real courage leaving a dangerous situation, even when you didn't know where you were going." Elena refilled Sarah's coffee cup and sat down across from her. "We have a guest room you can use while you figure out your next steps. Take as much time as you need to heal and plan. Sometimes the spirits send people to us not just so we can help them, but so they can help us too." Sarah felt tears starting again, but this time they came from gratitude rather than despair. "I can't pay you anything right now," she said. "I don't even have a job lined up or any way to know when I'll be able to contribute." Ayana spoke up from where she had been quietly listening. "My dad always says that money isn't the only way people can contribute to a household. There are gardens to tend, animals to care for, crafts to help make, children to teach. Everyone has something valuable to offer if you look beyond just dollars and cents." Thomas smiled at his daughter's words. Ayana is wise for her age. She gets that from her grandmother, who taught us that taking care of each other is just part of being human. When someone needs shelter, you provide it if you can. When someone needs food, you share what you have. It's not complicated. As Sarah sat in the warm kitchen, surrounded by people who had opened their home to a complete stranger, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safety. Real safety, not the temporary absence of danger, but the deep knowledge that she was among people who would protect and care for her. Elena showed her to a small room with a comfortable bed, clean sheets and a window that looked out over the desert landscape. "Rest as long as you need," Elena said, placing fresh towels on the dresser. "Tomorrow we can start thinking about practical things like finding work and getting you settled. But tonight, just let yourself sleep without worry." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed after Elena left, still hardly believing her circumstances had changed so dramatically in just a few hours. Her phone, which she had finally turned back on, showed 17 new messages from Roberto, ranging from angry demands to desperate pleas. For the first time since leaving Los Angeles, Sarah felt strong enough to respond. She typed a simple message: "I'm safe. Don't try to find me. Don't contact me again. Then she blocked his number and deleted all his previous messages. Looking out the window at the vast desert sky filled with more stars than she had ever seen, Sarah felt the beginning of something new growing inside her. Not just relief at escaping danger, but the possibility of building a life based on her own choices, rather than someone else's control. She fell asleep that night, to the sound of coyotes calling in the distance, and the gentle whisper of wind through the sagebrush, feeling protected by the kindness of strangers who had seen her worth when she had forgotten it herself. Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and breakfast cooking, sunlight streaming through curtains she had forgotten to close the night before. For the first few seconds, she couldn't remember where she was, and panic started to rise in her chest, until she saw the unfamiliar but peaceful room around her. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she felt a smile cross her face for the first time in months. In the kitchen, Elena was preparing eggs and toast while Thomas sat at the table working on a silver bracelet, his tools spread carefully around him. Ayanna was getting ready for school, packing books into her backpack while eating a piece of fruit. "Good morning," Elena said warmly, gesturing for Sarah to sit down. "I hope you slept well. The desert air takes some getting used to, but most people find it helps them rest deeper than they have in years." Sarah realized Elena was right. Despite everything that had happened, she had slept more peacefully than she had in her own bed back in Los Angeles, where she had always kept one ear listening for Roberto's footsteps, his key in the lock, the sounds that meant she needed to be ready to defend herself. Over breakfast, the family discussed Sarah's situation with the practical kindness of people accustomed to helping others through difficult times. Thomas knew several business owners in town who might be willing to hire someone without local references, and Elena suggested places where Sarah could volunteer while looking for work, both to stay busy and to meet people in the community. "The most important thing is not to rush," Thomas advised. "You've been through trauma and healing takes time. Don't put pressure on yourself to have everything figured out immediately." Ayanna lingered at the table even though she needed to leave for school. "Will you still be here when I get home?" she asked Sarah, and something in her voice suggested this wasn't just casual curiosity. "I hope so," Sarah replied. "If your parents don't mind having me around another day." "We mind if you leave before you're ready," Elena said firmly. "This is your home for as long as you need it to be." After Ayanna left for school and Thomas went to work on projects in his studio, Elena and Sarah sat together drinking coffee and talking. Elena shared stories about her own family's experiences, how her grandparents had been forced to attend boarding schools designed to eliminate their culture and language, how they had survived by holding on to their values and supporting each other through impossible circumstances. "Every family has stories of surviving things that seemed impossible," Elena said. "What you did, leaving an abusive situation with nothing but courage, that's part of a long tradition of people choosing life over safety, hope over fear." Sarah found herself opening up to Elena in ways she hadn't been able to talk to anyone in years. She described how Roberto had gradually isolated her from friends and family, how he had convinced her that no one else would ever love or want her, how she had started to believe that the abuse was somehow her fault. "Abusers are experts at making their victims feel responsible for the abuse," Elena said. "It's one of their most powerful tools, because if you believe you deserve to be hurt, you won't try to escape. Breaking free from that kind of psychological control is incredibly difficult." They spent the morning driving around Flagstaff so Sarah could get oriented to the town and apply for jobs. Elena introduced her to the manager of a small restaurant who was looking for someone to work morning shifts, and to the owner of a gift shop that sold Native American crafts and needed help with inventory and customer service. Both employers seemed initially hesitant when Sarah explained her situation honestly, but Elena's presence and recommendation carried weight in the community. "Sarah is staying with my family while she gets back on her feet," Elena told them. "She's reliable and hardworking, and she deserves a chance to prove herself." The restaurant manager, a middle-aged woman named Carol who had kind eyes and calloused hands, agreed to give Sarah a trial period. "I've been where you are," Carol said quietly after Elena stepped away to look at menu options. "Different circumstances, but I know what it's like to start over with nothing. If you're willing to work hard and learn fast, I'm willing to give you a shot." That afternoon, while Elena worked in her garden, Sarah sat on the porch and called her sister Julia in Phoenix, whom she hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. Roberto had gradually convinced her to cut contact with family members claiming they didn't really care about her and were just being polite. Julia answered on the third ring, and Sarah could hear the shock in her voice when she realized who was calling. "Sarah, oh my God, where have you been? I've been so worried about you. Every time I tried to call, Roberto said you were busy or didn't want to talk to me." Through tears, Sarah explained what had really been happening in her marriage, why she had seemed to disappear from her family's life, and how she had finally found the strength to leave. Julia listened with growing horror and anger. "I knew something wasn't right," Julia said. "But Roberto was always so charming when we saw you two together, and you seemed so distant. I thought maybe you were angry with me about something, or that married life had just changed you." They talked for over an hour, rebuilding a connection that had been severed by Roberto's manipulation and control. Julia offered to drive to Flagstaff immediately to bring Sarah to Phoenix, but Sarah found herself declining the offer. "I think I need to stay here for a while," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "The family I'm staying with, they understand what I've been through in a way that feels healing. And I think I have things to learn here, about myself and about how to build a life based on my own choices." That evening, when Ayanna returned from school, she found Sarah helping Elena prepare dinner, while Thomas worked nearby on a piece of jewelry that would be sold at a trading post in town. The domestic scene felt natural in a way that Sarah's previous life never had. "How was your first day as a free woman?" Ayanna asked with a maturity that continued to surprise Sarah. "Scary and hopeful at the same time," Sarah answered honestly. "I got a job at a restaurant downtown, and I talked to my sister for the first time in years. It feels like starting to remember who I used to be before I got lost." Ayanna nodded approvingly. "My grandmother used to say that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what was really yours to begin with. Maybe you needed to lose the life that wasn't really yours so you could build one that is." Over dinner, the family shared stories and laughter in a way that felt completely foreign to Sarah. In her marriage to Roberto, meals had been tense affairs where she worried constantly about whether the food was prepared correctly, whether she was eating too much or too little, whether some innocent comment might trigger his anger. Here, food was shared freely. Conversations meandered through topics both serious and silly, and disagreements were discussed with respect rather than violence. Sarah began to understand what a healthy family actually looked like, how people could live together without fear being a constant presence. As she helped Elena clean dishes after dinner, Sarah felt something she had almost forgotten existed: contentment. Not the desperate relief of avoiding punishment, not the temporary peace that came from Roberto being in a good mood, but the deep satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what felt right. Looking through the kitchen window at the desert landscape painted purple and gold by the setting sun, Sarah realized she was beginning to heal from wounds she hadn't even known she carried. The Begay family wasn't just giving her shelter from Roberto's reach. They were showing her what life could look like when it was built on love instead of control, on mutual respect instead of fear. For the first time since leaving Los Angeles, Sarah began to believe that she might actually be able to build the kind of life she had dreamed about during the darkest moments of her marriage, a life where she could make choices without fear, where she could be valued for who she really was, where safety wasn't something she had to earn through perfect behavior. 3 weeks into her new life with the Begay family, Sarah had settled into routines that felt both foreign and natural. She woke early to help Elena with breakfast, worked the morning shift at Carol's restaurant, spent afternoons helping Thomas with his jewelry business, and evenings talking with Ayanna about school and life and dreams for the future. The work at the restaurant was harder than her previous job at the grocery store, but Sarah found satisfaction in the physical demands and the direct interaction with customers. Carol had quickly recognized Sarah's dedication and attention to detail, gradually giving her more responsibilities and including her in decisions about menu changes and daily specials. "You have good instincts with people," Carol told her one busy morning as they prepared for the lunch rush. "Yesterday I watched you calm down that angry customer who was complaining about his order. You didn't take his rudeness personally, and you found a solution that made him happy. That's a skill you can't teach." Sarah felt a flush of pride at the compliment. In her marriage to Roberto, she had been constantly criticized and told she was incompetent at even simple tasks. Discovering that she was actually good at something, that her efforts were valued and appreciated, felt like reclaiming a part of herself she had thought was lost forever. Her evenings with the Begay family had become precious to her. Thomas taught her about traditional jewelry-making techniques, showing her how to work with silver and turquoise to create pieces that reflected both Navajo traditions and contemporary styles. His hands were patient and steady as he guided her through the delicate process of setting stones and shaping metal. Art isn't just about making beautiful things, Thomas explained as Sarah struggled with a particularly challenging bracelet design. It's about putting your spirit into something that will outlast your physical presence in the world. Every piece we make carries part of who we are, part of our story. Elena included Sarah in the daily rhythms of caring for their small homestead. There were vegetables to harvest from the garden, horses to feed and groom, and endless small repairs and improvements that kept their desert home functioning smoothly. Sarah had never lived so close to the land, never understood how much work went into creating a self-sufficient life. City people think country living is simple, Elena laughed as they worked together to fix a broken fence post. They don't realize that when you live away from stores and services, you have to know how to do everything yourself. But there's satisfaction in that independence, in knowing you can take care of your own needs. Ayanna had become like a younger sister to Sarah, full of questions about life beyond the reservation, curious about Sarah's experiences in Los Angeles and her journey to Arizona. The teenager was remarkably wise for her age, often offering insights that surprised Sarah with their depth and understanding. "Do you miss anything about your old life?" Ayanna asked one evening as they walked among the horses in the fading daylight. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I miss feeling like I knew what to expect each day, even if those expectations were mostly negative. There's something scary about freedom when you're not used to it. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for someone to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing, or worrying that I'm making the wrong choices." Ayanna nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that healing isn't a straight line. Some days you feel strong and confident, and other days you feel like you're back at the beginning. But each time you go through the cycle, you come back a little bit stronger, a little bit more yourself." The truth of this became apparent when Sarah received a letter forwarded from her old address in Los Angeles. Roberto had hired a private investigator to track her down, and the letter contained both threats and pleas for her return. Reading his words brought back all the old fear and confusion, making Sarah's hands shake as she held the paper. Thomas found her sitting on the porch steps that evening, staring out at the desert with tears streaming down her face. He sat beside her without speaking, his presence steady and calm until she felt ready to share what had upset her. "He found me," she said simply, showing him the letter. "Roberto hired someone to track me down. He knows I'm in Arizona, and he's threatening to come here if I don't return voluntarily." Thomas read the letter carefully, his expression growing more serious with each paragraph. "This is harassment and stalking," he said finally. "You have legal options to protect yourself, and you have a community here that won't let anyone hurt you." That night, the entire Begay family sat around the kitchen table discussing practical steps to ensure Sarah's safety. Elena researched restraining order procedures. Ayanna offered to skip school and stay home if Sarah felt unsafe being alone during the day. And Thomas made calls to friends in law enforcement who could provide advice about dealing with threats from out-of-state abusers. "The most important thing to remember," Thomas said as they planned their response, "is that you're not facing this alone anymore. Roberto might have been able to control and intimidate you when you were isolated, but you have allies now. You have people who will stand with you and protect you." The next morning, Sarah woke to find Ayanna sitting on the floor beside her bed, fully dressed for school but making no move to leave. "I've been thinking about what my great-grandmother would say about your situation," Ayanna said quietly. "She always told stories about how our people survived by taking care of each other, by never letting anyone face danger alone." Sarah sat up in bed, touched by the teenager's concern. "You should go to school. I'll be fine here with your parents." But Ayanna shook her head firmly. "My dad called the school and explained the situation. They're letting me do independent study today, so I can help watch for any strangers coming around the property. We're all going to take turns making sure you're never alone until we figure out how to handle Roberto." The level of protection and care the family was offering overwhelmed Sarah with gratitude. She had spent so many years believing that she was a burden, that asking for help was selfish, that she deserved whatever treatment she received. Learning to accept genuine love and support felt like learning a completely new language. Carol was equally supportive when Sarah explained why she might need to adjust her work schedule or take time off to deal with legal proceedings. "I went through something similar with my ex-husband 15 years ago," Carol revealed. "The restaurant community in this town looks out for each other. If this Roberto character shows up here looking for you, he'll find himself dealing with more people than he bargained for." As the day progressed, Sarah began to see how different her life had become. Instead of facing Roberto's threats with the isolation and helplessness she had felt in Los Angeles, she was surrounded by people who immediately rallied to her defense. The contrast made her realize how much she had changed in just a few weeks. That afternoon, while helping Thomas in his studio, Sarah found herself talking about her fears and her growing sense of strength. "I keep waiting to feel like the same scared woman who got off the bus 3 weeks ago," she said as she carefully polished a silver pendant. "But that person feels like someone I used to know rather than who I am now." Thomas smiled as he worked on setting a piece of turquoise. "That's because you're remembering who you really are underneath all the fear and control. The person you're becoming isn't new, Sarah. She's who you always were before someone convinced you to hide her away." In the evening, as they prepared dinner together, Elena shared more family stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in community. "My great-aunt once told me that courage isn't something you're born with or without," Elena said as she seasoned vegetables from their garden. "It's something that grows when you're surrounded by people who believe in your worth, who remind you of your own power when you forget." Sarah realized that this was exactly what was happening to her. The Bigay family wasn't just providing her with shelter and practical support. They were reflecting back to her a version of herself that was capable, valuable, and deserving of respect and love. When Ayana came to say goodnight that evening, she brought Sarah a small piece of turquoise that Thomas had shaped into a smooth oval stone. "This is for protection and courage," Ayana explained. "My grandmother gave me one just like it when I was little and afraid of starting school. She said it would remind me that I carry the strength of all the women in my family, even when I feel small and scared." Sarah held the stone in her palm, feeling its weight and warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay what your family has given me." Ayana smiled with wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "You don't repay kindness, Sarah, you pass it forward. Someday, when you're strong and settled and happy, you'll have the chance to help someone else who's lost and afraid. That's how the circle continues." As Sarah lay in bed that night, holding the turquoise stone and listening to the sounds of the desert settling into darkness, she felt a fundamental shift in how she saw herself and her future. Roberto's letter had initially brought back all her old fears, but the response from her new community had shown her something more powerful than fear. She was no longer the isolated, controlled woman who had stepped off the bus in Flagstaff. She was someone with allies, someone with skills and value, someone worth protecting and defending. Whatever happened when Roberto tried to find her, she would face it not as a victim, but as a woman who had learned to stand in her own power, surrounded by people who believed in her strength even when she struggled to believe in it herself. 2 months after receiving Roberto's threatening letter, Sarah stood in the Flagstaff courthouse holding a restraining order that legally protected her from any contact with her ex-husband. The process had been difficult, requiring her to relive painful memories and provide detailed testimony about years of abuse. But having the legal document in her hands felt like reclaiming control over her own life. Thomas and Elena had accompanied her to every court hearing, their quiet presence providing strength when Sarah's courage wavered. The judge, a woman who had clearly seen many similar cases, had been thorough in explaining Sarah's rights and the legal protections now available to her. "This restraining order is more than just a piece of paper," the judge had explained. "It's a statement that you deserve to live without fear, and that the legal system will support your right to safety and peace." Walking out of the courthouse into the bright Arizona sunshine, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. Roberto had never actually appeared in Flagstaff, apparently deterred by the swift legal response and the knowledge that Sarah was no longer isolated and vulnerable. His private investigator had reported back that she was living with a Native American family who had connections throughout. The local law enforcement community, Carol, had given Sarah the afternoon off to handle the court proceedings, and she returned to the restaurant to find a small celebration waiting for her. The regular customers had heard about her situation through the tight-knit community network, and many had stopped by to offer their support and congratulations on her legal victory. "You've become part of our family here," said Mrs. Peterson, an elderly woman who came in for coffee every morning and always requested Sarah as her server. "We're all proud of how strong you've been through this whole ordeal." That evening, the Begay family marked the occasion with Sarah's favorite meal, and a small ceremony that Thomas explained was traditionally used to mark important transitions and new beginnings. They gathered in their backyard as the sun set over the desert, each person sharing words about what Sarah's journey had meant to them. Elena spoke about watching Sarah transform from a frightened woman into someone confident and self-assured. "You came to us looking for shelter," she said, "but you've given us the gift of seeing what real courage looks like. You've reminded us that healing is possible, even from the deepest wounds." Ayanna, now a senior in high school, talked about how Sarah's presence had taught her about the importance of standing up for people who need help. "Before you came to live with us, I thought about social justice as something abstract, something you read about in books. But watching you rebuild your life showed me that justice is something you create through everyday actions, through choosing to protect and care for each other." Thomas shared his observations about Sarah's growing confidence and skills. "When you first arrived, you apologized for everything, even for taking up space at our table. Now you speak your mind, you make decisions with confidence, and you know your own worth. That transformation happened because you had the courage to leave a situation that was killing your spirit." When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she found herself struggling to put her gratitude into words. "6 months ago, I thought my life was over," she began. "I believed I was worthless, that I deserved whatever treatment I received, that I would never be strong enough or valuable enough to build a real life." She paused, looking around at the faces of the people who had become her chosen family. "You didn't just give me a place to stay, you gave me back myself. You showed me what love looks like when it's not mixed with control and fear. You taught me that I have something valuable to contribute to the world." The ceremony concluded with Thomas presenting Sarah with a piece of jewelry he had been working on for weeks, a silver necklace with a turquoise pendant that incorporated traditional Navajo designs with contemporary elements. "This represents your journey," he explained. "The traditional elements honor where you've been and what you've survived. The contemporary design celebrates who you're becoming." As autumn turned into winter, Sarah's life continued to evolve and deepen. Carol offered her a partnership opportunity in expanding the restaurant's catering business, recognizing Sarah's natural ability to organize events and connect with customers. The additional income allowed Sarah to start contributing more substantially to the Begay family's household expenses, though they continued to insist that her presence was worth far more than any money she could provide. Sarah also began volunteering at the local women's shelter, sharing her story with other survivors of domestic violence and helping them navigate the practical challenges of starting over. Working with women who were at the beginning of their own journeys reminded Sarah how far she had traveled from that first night, sleeping behind a restaurant with nothing but a suitcase and $43. More of them look at me like I'm some kind of hero. Sarah told Ayanna one evening as they worked together in Elena's garden, "But I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who was incredibly lucky to meet the right people at the right time." Ayanna, now preparing for college applications, smiled at Sarah's characteristic humility. "Maybe luck was part of it," she said. "But luck doesn't explain how hard you worked to rebuild your life or how brave you were to leave everything familiar behind. And it doesn't explain how you've turned your experience into something that helps other people heal." As winter deepened into the new year, Sarah received news that surprised everyone, including herself. Her sister Julia called to say that their estranged mother, who had been distant and critical throughout Sarah's childhood, wanted to reconnect after learning about Sarah's situation from Julia. "She feels terrible about not being more supportive when you were growing up," Julia explained. "She thinks maybe if she had been a better mother, you wouldn't have ended up in an abusive relationship as an adult." Sarah found herself able to approach this potential reconciliation with a perspective she never could have managed before living with the Begay family. "I'm willing to talk with her," she told Julia, "but I'm not going to take responsibility for her guilt or try to make her feel better about the past. I've learned that I can forgive people without making myself responsible for managing their emotions." The conversation with her mother, when it finally happened, was difficult, but healing. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah was able to set clear boundaries about what kind of relationship she was willing to have, based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Spring brought new opportunities and challenges. Ayanna was accepted to several colleges, and the family began preparing for the major transition of her leaving home. Sarah realized that Ayanna's departure would mark the end of one chapter of her recovery and the beginning of another. "I keep thinking about what you said that first night we met," Sarah told Ayanna as they sat on the porch watching horses graze in the distance, "about strangers being family we haven't met yet. I never understood what that meant until I lived it." Ayanna leaned against Sarah's shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. "My grandmother used to say that some people come into your life to teach you lessons, and other people come to stay forever. You're definitely the kind who stays forever, even when geography separates us." As Sarah looked out over the desert landscape that had become home, she realized that her journey had come full circle in ways she never could have imagined. She had arrived in Flagstaff as a refugee from her own life, seeking nothing more than escape from immediate danger. But she had found something far more valuable than safety. She had found herself again, not the person she had been before Roberto, but someone stronger and wiser, someone who understood both her own worth and the power of community, to heal even the deepest wounds. She had learned that family could be chosen as well as inherited. That home was wherever people loved and valued you for who you really were. Most importantly, she had discovered that survival was just the beginning. Real healing came through connection, through purpose, through using your own experience to help others find their way out of darkness. As she prepared to help Ayanna leave for college and to take on new responsibilities in her expanding business partnership with Carol, Sarah knew that her story was no longer about escaping from something, but about building towards something beautiful and meaningful. The woman who had once believed she deserved nothing better than fear and control had become someone who knew, without doubt, that she deserved love, respect, and the chance to create a life that honored both her struggles and her strength.